Most people believe procrastination is a time management problem. Neil Fiore spent years proving it's a psychology problem and that the difference changes everything about how to solve it. Picture someone sitting at a desk at 11:45 at night. The deadline is midnight. They haven't touched the project in 2 weeks. Their hands are shaking slightly, and they are more productive in the next 40 minutes than they were in the 14 days before it. That person is not lazy. Fiore spent his career explaining exactly what they are. And the answer starts with something almost every chronic procrastinator has said at some point to explain themselves. I work best under pressure. It sounds like a personality trait, a quirk, even a kind of superpower. Fiore's research suggests it's actually the clearest possible signal that something has gone wrong, that the only condition under which a person can allow themselves to work is when the deadline has finally removed their ability to avoid it. This is the now habit. Picture this. You have something important to do. You know it's important. You've known it's important for days, maybe weeks, and you're doing everything except it. You're reorganizing your workspace, checking your email for the fourth time, researching something adjacent but not quite the task itself. Making coffee, even though you're not particularly thirsty. The task sits there, visible, occasionally guilt-inducing, and somehow impossible to actually begin. By the time the deadline is close enough to force your hand, you've accumulated a week's worth of shame about not having started. And now you have to start while carrying all of it. Neil Fiore's diagnosis, after decades working as a psychologist with procrastinators, is not what most people expect. The problem isn't your discipline. It's what starting the task feels like, and what your brain has learned to do about that feeling. Fiore's central argument is the one that changes everything. Procrastination is not laziness. It is a coping mechanism. Specifically, it's a response to a perceived psychological threat. That threat is almost always one of three things: fear of failure, fear of judgment, or fear that the finished product will reveal something unflattering about your ability. The task itself isn't difficult. What's difficult is the exposure that starting it creates. As long as the report is unwritten, you can tell yourself you'd have done it well if you'd had more time. As long as the application is unsent, the rejection hasn't happened yet. Procrastination, in this framing, is protection. Imperfect, costly, ultimately self-defeating protection, but protection nonetheless. Fiore found something in his research that should have made headlines. The people most likely to procrastinate chronically are not low achievers. Studies consistently show they are, on average, higher in conscientiousness and personal standards than people who don't procrastinate at all. The avoidance is not evidence of caring less. It is evidence of caring more than they know how to manage. Picture two people given the same assignment on the same day. One, relatively indifferent to the outcome, starts it that afternoon and finishes it adequately. The other, who cares deeply about doing it well, spends the next 2 weeks orbiting the task, thinking about it, dreading it, imagining how it might go wrong, without producing a single sentence. At the deadline, they produce something rushed that they're unhappy with, which confirms their suspicion that they weren't capable of doing it justice. The avoidance that was supposed to protect them from that outcome produced it instead. Here is where the book turns from diagnosis to the mechanism that keeps the problem locked in place. Most people, when they procrastinate, respond to themselves with guilt. The longer the avoidance, the more intense the guilt. It seems logical. Guilt is supposed to motivate action. What Fiore found across years of working with procrastinators is that it does the opposite. Guilt doesn't produce action, it produces shame. And shame, unlike guilt, doesn't point toward a specific behavior to change. It indicts the person having it. The shift from "I haven't done this" to "I'm the kind of person who doesn't do things" is quiet, fast, and completely paralyzing. Picture someone who has been avoiding a project for 2 weeks. The amount of emotional charge around starting it has grown with every passing day, not because the task got harder, but because the accumulated guilt has made starting feel like an implicit admission of every negative thing they've thought about themselves during the avoidance. Starting the task means confronting the shame directly. So the brain finds another reason to wait one more day. The guilt that was supposed to push them toward action has become one more reason to avoid it. Fiore's solution to the guilt trap is not what any therapist will tell you. It doesn't start with mindset. It starts with 3 words you've been saying wrong your entire working life. Fiore's first practical intervention is a change in language so small it seems almost too simple to matter, and turns out to be one of the most structurally important shifts in the book. Most procrastinators talk to themselves using the language of obligation and completion. I have to finish this. I must get this done. I need to complete the whole thing before I can rest. Each of these sentences frames the task as a threat, something to be endured, survived, gotten through. The brain, already associating the task with exposure and judgment, hears that framing and intensifies its resistance. Fiore replaces it with 2 questions. Instead of, I have to finish this, ask, when can I start? Instead of, I must complete the whole thing, ask, what's the smallest possible beginning? The shift from finish to start is not cosmetic. Starting is entirely within your control. Finishing depends on the quality of the work, the response of others, the outcome of a process you can't fully predict. Starting simply requires beginning. For 30 minutes, without judgment, with no obligation to do it well. The brain that recoils from the former will often reluctantly accept the latter. Picture someone who has spent a week unable to open a document they need to write. I have to write this has failed them every day for 7 days. Replace it with, I'm going to open the document and write 1 paragraph, and then I'm allowed to stop. And something shifts. Not because the task changed, because the psychological ask changed. 1 sentence instead of the whole unbearable project. The brain can agree to 1 sentence in a way it cannot agree to the entire looming thing. But the language shift alone isn't enough. Because there's a second trap that catches nearly every procrastinator who tries to fix the problem, and it's hidden inside the tool they trust most, their calendar. Fiore's most counterintuitive practical tool is what he calls the unschedule, a reverse approach to planning that most time management advice would consider backwards. The unscheduled starts by filling in everything that is already committed to in a given week: sleep, meals, exercise, social events, leisure, not work, everything else. What remains visible after those blocks are placed is the actual time available for work, usually far less than people imagine, which immediately reduces the guilt of not spending every waking hour on the task. Then, within that available time, the only rule is to record work after it happens, not to schedule it in advance. 30 minutes of focused work gets logged. Another 30 logged. The record becomes proof of progress rather than a list of obligations missed, which changes the emotional relationship with the work entirely. The deeper logic underneath the unschedule is the book's real argument about leisure. Fiore found that procrastinators who scheduled no genuine rest created a psychological condition where all non-work time felt like stolen time, enjoyable only in the way that forbidden things are enjoyable, shadowed by guilt. Guilt-free leisure, built into the week deliberately, removes that shadow. Work becomes something you choose to return to, rather than something you're always slightly fleeing. Near the end of this book, Fiore arrives at the reframe that the entire argument was always pointing toward. Procrastination is not a character flaw, it is a strategy. A strategy you developed, probably early, to protect yourself from the specific pain that comes with trying and falling short. It worked, in a narrow sense. It prevented the exposure. It delayed the judgment. It kept the possible version of yourself, the one who might have done it well, safely in the future, untested and therefore unthreatened. But it also kept that version of you permanently in the future, because the thing that protects you from failure also prevents you from finding out what you're actually capable of. The Now Habit's deepest claim is this: the question is never whether you have the discipline to finish. The question is whether you can give yourself permission to start, imperfectly, partially, without the outcome guaranteed, and trust that starting, repeated enough times, is the only process by which anything worth finishing ever gets done. Picture that same person. 11:45 at night, hands shaking, deadline in 15 minutes. Now picture them 6 months later opening the same kind of document at 2 in the afternoon. Not because the deadline forced them, because they gave themselves permission to start badly, and found out that starting badly was all it ever took. Somewhere in the last few minutes, a specific task probably surfaced, the one you've been circling for days without landing on it. Fiore's question isn't whether you're disciplined enough to finish it. It's this: when can you start? Not for the whole session, not until it's done. For 30 minutes, without judgment, without the outcome attached. That's the entire intervention. That's the Now Habit. Before you go, I want to know something. Is procrastination something you chose, or something that was built into you by how you were taught to handle failure? Leave your honest answer in the comments. And one more. Have you ever used "I work best under pressure" to explain yourself and actually believed it? Tell me below. I want to know if Fiore's diagnosis matches your experience. If this gave you something worth starting today, subscribe, because the next video on this channel might be the next thing nobody ever reframed for you this clearly. See you in the next one.